Elena Vasquez held the manuscript, carefully brown parchment, covered in symbols that looked like ancient art. Around her, 30 tech millionaires laughed and drank champagne that cost more than she made in a month. Robert Reynolds, her employer, gestured at the document with his $85,000 Rolex. $2 million for something no one can read, he announced, voice thick with wine. That's what separates people like me from people like her. He waved dismissively at Elena. Anyone translate this, I'll give them my yearly salary, $850,000. The room erupted in laughter. Someone yelled, "Better hope your maid doesn't speak ancient Mayan." More laughter. But Elena wasn't laughing, because she could read every single word, and what those words said was going to destroy everyone in this room. 6 months earlier, Elena Vasquez had stood outside the gates of Robert Reynolds' Palo Alto mansion with a fake resume and a real vendetta. The resume said she was a housekeeper from Oaxaca, Mexico, limited English, no formal education, references from families in Texas and Arizona. All of it was technically true. She was from Oaxaca. She had worked as a housekeeper for exactly 2 weeks during her undergraduate years at UNAM. The references were real people who owed favors to the FBI. What the resume didn't say, Dr. Elena Maria Vasquez, 4 PhDs linguistics, anthropology, ancient languages, and cryptography. Former Cambridge professor, author of the definitive text on Mayan hieroglyphics and modern indigenous language preservation. Current lead investigator for the FBI's white-collar crime division specializing in tech fraud. And sister to Miguel Vasquez, whose startup had been destroyed by Robert Reynolds 18 months ago. Miguel's company had been called Bridge Code, a platform connecting Latino developers with tech companies. Simple. Needed. Miguel had bootstrapped it for 3 years, living on rice and beans, coding 16 hours a day. When Robert Reynolds' venture capital firm offered to invest, Miguel had cried with relief. 6 months later, Bridge Code was dead. The code had been copied, the client list stolen, the intellectual property transferred to a shell company that Robert controlled. Miguel had $40,000 in legal bills and no way to fight back. He wasn't alone. Elena's investigation had uncovered 50 similar cases. 50 founders, Black, Latino, Asian women who'd been promised investment and ended up robbed. Total theft, $180 million in intellectual property and trade secrets. But Robert Reynolds was careful. Very careful. Everything was legal on paper. Contracts signed, agreements notarized. The theft was invisible unless you knew what to look for. That's why Elena had spent the last 6 months scrubbing toilets and folding laundry. The mansion was exactly what you'd expect from a tech millionaire who'd made his money by stealing other people's ideas. 12,000 square feet. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Silicon Valley. Art that Elena recognized from auction catalogs, a Basquiat in the dining room, a Rothko in the study. Robert had a wine cellar that could have funded a community college for a year. He collected things. Art, wine, rare books, ancient artifacts, and apparently documents that he couldn't read but bought anyway because they made him feel important. Elena cleaned his office 3 times a week. That's where she'd seen the correspondence with James Whitmore Roberts' business partner and the man who actually did the technical work of stealing code. James was brilliant, MIT grad, could reverse engineer anything. He was also Robert's weakness, because James kept records of everything, every theft, every stolen line of code, every forged signature. He kept it all in encrypted files that he thought were unhackable. He was wrong. Elena had copied the files in her second week. 11 terabytes of data. The FBI's cybercrimes unit was still working through it all. But the problem was evidence. Everything they had was circumstantial. Good enough to know Robert and James were guilty, not good enough to convict in court. What they needed was a confession, or a mistake so big that even Robert's army of lawyers couldn't explain it away. That's when Elena saw the manuscript. Robert had bought it at a private auction, $2 million. He'd been bragging about it for weeks, and Authentic Mayan codex, pre-Columbian, priceless historical value. He kept it in a climate-controlled case in his study, showed it off to every guest who visited. Elena had examined it one afternoon while Robert was at a board meeting. Her hands had trembled as she opened the case, because she recognized the writing immediately. Not pre-Columbian, not ancient, maybe 5 years old, written in a modern adaptation of Mayan glyphs, a kind of code that maybe 12 people in the world could read. Elena was one of them. The document was a record, a detailed, meticulous record of every theft, every stolen startup, every forged contract. But it was more than that. It was a confession to fraud, to theft, and to murder. 3 years ago, a woman named Sarah Lynn had been Robert's partner. She'd discovered the fraud scheme, threatened to go to the authorities. 2 weeks later, she died in a hiking accident in Big Sur, single-vehicle crash on Highway 1. Her car had gone over a cliff. No witnesses. The police had ruled it an accident. But the manuscript told a different story. In careful coded glyphs, someone had written exactly how Sarah's brakes had been tampered with, how the accident had been staged, how her death had been necessary to protect the operation. The document was signed with Robert's personal glyph, a symbol he'd chosen himself, when he started collecting Mayan artifacts. He'd had it made into a seal, used it on personal correspondence. It was uniquely, undeniably his. Elena had photographed every page, sent the images to her FBI handler, and waited. Because she needed Robert to incriminate himself, needed him to acknowledge the document, claim ownership, make it impossible to deny. That's when she learned about the dinner party. Robert was hosting 30 investors, showing off his collection, including the manuscript. This was her chance. She'd spent the last 2 weeks preparing, learning every word, every symbol, planning exactly what she'd say and when. Tonight, Robert Reynolds was going to destroy himself, and he'd do it in front of 30 witnesses. The dinner party started at 7 p.m. Elena had spent the afternoon preparing. Not just the food, Robert's chef handled that, but the presentation, the ambiance, making sure every detail was perfect, making sure everyone would have a clear view of what was about to happen. The guests arrived in Teslas and Porsches, old money and new, VCs and founders. People who made $1 million sound like pocket change. They gathered in Robert's great room, a space that could have housed 3 normal families. The Basquiat glowed under strategic lighting. Servers in crisp uniforms circulated with drinks. Elena was one of them. Invisible, just another brown face serving wealthy white people. She'd been playing this role for 6 months, had it down to a science. The trick was to never meet their eyes, never speak unless spoken to, move quietly, disappear into the furniture. People said anything around her. They forgot she was human. The key to venture capital. A man in a Tom Ford suit was saying, is identifying desperation. Someone who needs money badly will sign anything. His companion laughed. Especially the diversity founders. They're so grateful for any attention. Elena poured wine, kept her face neutral, memorized their faces for the FBI report. Robert was in his element, glass of wine in hand, expensive smile. He worked the room like a politician, touching shoulders, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. He'd changed for the dinner silk shirt, tailored slack shoes that cost more than Elena's monthly salary. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert announced, tapping his glass. The room quieted. "Tonight I want to share something special, a piece of history that represents everything I love about this life we've built." He gestured dramatically toward his study. 2 servers, Elena and another woman named Maria, wheeled out a cart. On it sat the climate-controlled case containing the manuscript. The room oohed and awed. These were people who collected things, who understood the language of wealth and acquisition. "This," Robert said, opening the case with a key he wore on a chain around his neck, "is a pre-Columbian Mayan codex, over 800 years old. one of only 4 known to exist in private hands. He was lying. The manuscript was maybe 5 years old, but nobody in the room knew that. The writing is untranslatable. Scholars have tried for decades, but some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. He lifted the manuscript carefully, held it up for everyone to see. I paid $2 million for this, not because I can read it, but because I can own it. That's the difference between people like us and everyone else. We don't need to understand something to possess it. The room applauded. Elena felt her jaw tighten. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. But she needed to wait a little longer, needed Robert to dig himself deeper. A woman in Chanel raised her hand. Robert, has anyone ever tried to translate it just out of curiosity? Robert laughed. Dozens of experts, linguists, anthropologists, even some MIT professor who claimed to specialize in ancient languages. He took a long drink of wine. They all failed. It's gibberish, probably. Or maybe it's a shopping list from 1200 AD. Who knows, who cares? But if someone could translate it, the woman pressed. What would you give them? Robert's eyes glinted. He was drunk now. Elena could see it in the looseness of his gestures, the way he swayed slightly. Perfect. If someone could translate this, Robert said loudly, I would give them my yearly salary. Every penny. That's how confident I am that it's impossible. The room erupted in laughter. Someone yelled, Better hope your housekeeper doesn't speak ancient Mayan. More laughter. Robert gestured at Elena. She barely speaks English. No offense, Elena. Elena looked up. Met his eyes for the first time in 6 months. No offense taken, Mr. Reynolds. Her English was perfect. No trace of the accent she'd been faking. The room noticed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Robert's smile faltered. You speak English. Fluently, Elena said calmly. Also Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, German, Mandarin, and 12 indigenous Mesoamerican languages, including classic and modern Mayan. The silence was absolute. Robert's face went from flushed to pale. That's you never said, you never asked, Elena replied. She set down her wine bottle, walked toward the manuscript. May I? Robert's hand instinctively tightened on the parchment, but he was trapped. 30 pairs of eyes watching. He'd made a public challenge. If he backed down now, he'd look like a coward. Worse, he'd look like a fraud. This is ridiculous, he said, but his voice was uncertain. Go ahead. Waste everyone's time. Elena took the manuscript, held it carefully. She'd memorized every word, but she made a show of examining it, letting the tension build. Finally, she looked up. This isn't 800 years old, Mr. Reynolds. It's approximately 5 years old. The parchment is aged artificially, you can tell by the way the ink sits on the surface, and the glyphs aren't pre-Columbian, they're modern Mayan, a written form developed in the 1980s by linguists working with indigenous communities. Robert's face went from pale to gray. That's no. The auction house authenticated. The auction house lied, Elena said simply. Or they were fooled. Either way, this is not an ancient artifact. A man near the back pulled out his phone, started typing, probably Googling Elena's claims. Good. Let him. But it is valuable, Elena continued. Not as art, as evidence. She turned the manuscript so the room could see, began reading. Her voice was steady, clear, each word landing like a bomb. This document is written in modern Mayan glyphs, a code used by a very small number of people. It details 47 instances of intellectual property theft between 2019 and 2023. Companies targeted, code stolen, founders defrauded. Each theft is listed with dates, methods, and amounts stolen. The room was dead silent. Elena could hear the air conditioning, could hear someone's phone vibrating, could hear Robert's breathing getting faster. It also details the murder of Sarah Lynn on March 15, 2021, how her car's brake lines were cut, how the accident was staged, how her death was necessary because she'd discovered the fraud and threatened to expose it. Robert lunged for the manuscript. Elena stepped back smoothly. Two men appeared from the sides of the room. FBI agents who'd been posing as caterers. They caught Robert's arms. "Don't touch anything, Mr. Reynolds," one of them said. "This is evidence in a federal investigation." The room erupted, people shouting, phones coming out. A woman screamed. Someone dropped a glass and it shattered on the marble floor. Robert was struggling against the agents. "This is insane. I don't know what she's talking about. That manuscript is art. It doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," Elena said quietly. "And you signed it." She pointed to a glyph at the bottom of the last page. "This is your personal seal. The one you had made when you started collecting Mayan artifacts. You use it on correspondence, on contracts, on personal documents. It's unique to you. And it's right here claiming authorship of this confession." Robert stopped struggling, stared at the glyph. "I didn't. That's not. Someone must have." "Someone did," Elena agreed. "Someone wrote this document, detailed every crime you committed, and signed your name to it. The question is, who would do that?" She turned to face the room, scanned the faces, stopped on a man near the window. Tall, thin, wearing glasses that were too expensive to be practical. James Whitmore, Robert's partner. James was smiling. It was a small smile, sad, almost apologetic. "Hello, Robert," James said quietly. Robert's face went through several emotions at once: confusion, recognition, horror. "James, you know, we're partners. We built this together. You wouldn't." "I would," James said, "and I did." He walked forward. Every eye in the room tracked him. "My name is James Whitmore. I've been Robert Reynolds' partner for 7 years, and for the last 2 years I've been an undercover FBI agent." The room exploded again. More shouting. Someone started crying. A man near the door bolted. One of the FBI agents caught him. James continued calmly. "I was approached by the FBI in 2022. They were investigating several cases of IP theft targeting minority founders. My name came up. They had evidence of my involvement. Offered me a choice: prison or cooperation." He looked at Robert. "I chose cooperation. Spent 2 years documenting every theft, every crime, every forged signature, everything." Robert was shaking his head. "No. No, you're lying. We're friends. We were never friends," James said. There was something cold in his voice. "You used me, my skills, my work, and when Sarah figured out what we were doing, when she threatened to go to the police," his voice broke. "You had her killed, and you made me help cover it up." The room went silent again. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. "Sarah was my fiancée," James said. "We were going to get married. She was pregnant. 3 months. Elena hadn't known that. She saw the pain flash across James's face, quickly hidden. "After she died, I waited, bided my time. When the FBI approached me, I saw my chance. I helped them build a case, documented everything. But we needed something ironclad, something you couldn't deny." He nodded at the manuscript. "So I created that, spent 6 months writing it. Used the code you thought only you understood, the Mayan glyphs you'd been teaching yourself from those expensive books. Documented every crime, every theft. And then I aged the parchment, faked the authentication, and arranged for it to appear at the auction you frequent." Robert's legs gave out. He collapsed into a chair. "You set me up." "I brought you to justice," James corrected. "There's a difference." Elena stepped forward. "Mr. Reynolds, I need to inform you that I'm not actually your housekeeper. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I'm a special agent with the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. I've been investigating you for 6 months. Everything you've said in my presence has been recorded. Everything." She pulled a small device from her uniform, a wire. She'd been wearing it every day. "You have the right to remain silent," one of the FBI agents began. But Robert wasn't listening. He was staring at Elena. You're FBI the whole time." "The whole time," Elena confirmed. including the time you bragged about destroying bridge code, including the time you explained to your lawyer how to hide assets from fraud victims, including tonight when you challenged me to translate this document and then tried to claim it was meaningless art." She paused. "By the way, bridge code's founder, Miguel Vasquez, that's my brother." Robert's face went completely blank, like his brain had short-circuited. "Your brother? My younger brother? The one whose company you destroyed, whose code you stole, who spent 18 months in legal hell because you're a thief?" Elena's voice was calm, almost gentle. That made it worse somehow. "He sends his regards." The FBI agents were putting handcuffs on Robert now, reading him his rights. He wasn't resisting anymore, just staring at nothing. But Elena wasn't done. She turned to face the 30 guests. They'd been watching in stunned silence. Some were crying. Some were on their phones, probably calling lawyers. Some just looked sick. "Everyone in this room needs to stay," Elena announced. "My colleagues will be taking statements. If you've done business with Robert Reynolds or James Whitmore, if you've invested in companies they've targeted, if you have any knowledge of their activities, we need to talk to you." A man in Armani stood up. "I want my lawyer." "That's your right," Elena said. "But know this. We have 7 years of financial records. Every transaction, every investment, every dollar that moved through Robert's accounts. If you profited from stolen intellectual property, if you knowingly invested in fraud, you're part of this." The man sat back down. Nobody left. FBI agents were moving through the room now, taking names, separating people. Elena walked over to James Whitmore. He was standing alone watching Robert being led away. "How are you doing?" Elena asked quietly. James shrugged. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel better. Vindicated. Something." He looked at her. "I helped steal from 50 people. Destroyed their dreams. And one of them, Sarah, I got her killed." "You didn't kill her," Elena said firmly. "Robert did. You've been trying to make it right. That counts for something." "Does it?" James's voice was bitter. "She's still dead. Our baby is still dead. Saying sorry doesn't bring them back." Elena didn't have an answer for that. Some things couldn't be fixed. Some losses were permanent. "The prosecution is recommending no jail time," she said instead. "Full immunity for your cooperation. Witness protection if you want it." "I don't," James said immediately. "I'm done hiding. Done pretending to be someone I'm not." He pulled off his glasses. They were plain glass. Part of the disguise. "I'm going to testify at every trial, face every person we hurt, take responsibility for what I did." Elena nodded. "That takes courage." "No," James said. "Courage is what Sarah had. Standing up to Robert even though she knew it was dangerous. This is just..." He paused. "This is just trying to live with myself." They stood in silence for a moment. Around them, the party had transformed into a crime scene. FBI agents, shell-shocked guests, the wreckage of Robert Reynolds' carefully constructed lie. "The manuscript," Elena said. "Why Mayan? Why that code, specifically?" James smiled slightly. "Sarah was a linguist. Not professionally, just she loved languages. Loved trying to decode things. When we first met, I told her about this article I'd read about modern Mayan glyphs. How scholars were trying to preserve indigenous languages by creating new written forms." He looked at the manuscript. She said it was beautiful. The idea that something could be both ancient and new. That you could honor the past while creating something for the future. His voice broke again. "So when I needed to document what we'd done, when I needed to create something Robert wouldn't understand, I used her language. It felt like she was helping me. Like we were finally stopping him together." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. "She'd be proud of you." "Maybe," James said. "Or maybe she'd say, I should have done this 2 years ago, before 50 more people got hurt." Before Elena could respond, another FBI agent approached. "Dr. Vasquez, we need you for the interrogation." Elena nodded, looked at James. You did the right thing. Eventually. That's better than never. She walked away, leaving James standing alone in the ruins of the empire he'd helped build and then destroyed. The interrogation room was small and cold, deliberately uncomfortable. Robert Reynolds sat on one side of a metal table, his lawyer on his right. The lawyer was expensive. Elena recognized him from news reports. Harrison Walsh, defender of tech CEOs and hedge fund managers. His fee was probably more than she made in a year. Elena sat across from them, a folder in front of her. She didn't open it. Just looked at Robert. He'd aged 10 years in the last 3 hours. His silk shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were red. He looked small, defeated. Good. My client has nothing to say, Harrison began. This entire arrest was a setup, entrapment. That manuscript was planted by his business partner, Elena interrupted. Who worked with the FBI, yes. But entrapment requires us to convince someone to commit a crime they wouldn't otherwise commit. Your client has been committing crimes for 7 years. We just documented them. Harrison's jaw tightened. The manuscript is inadmissible. It's hearsay. Creative writing. It proves nothing. The manuscript is a confession, Elena said calmly. Signed with your client's personal seal, a seal he uses exclusively, a seal that appears on dozens of documents we've subpoenaed. She opened the folder, pulled out a stack of papers. Contracts, letters, purchase orders, all bearing the same seal, all authenticated by handwriting experts as belonging to Robert Reynolds. She pushed the papers across the table. We also have 7 years of financial records, encrypted files your client thought were secure, emails, text messages, recorded conversations. She pulled out a small recorder, pressed play. Robert's voice filled the room. The trick is to make them grateful. These diversity founders, they're so desperate for validation that they'll sign anything. By the time they realize we've stolen their IP, it's too late. Harrison's face went pale. Robert slumped in his chair. Where did you get that? He whispered. Your house, Elena said. You have the same conversation with James Whitmore every month. Budget meetings, strategy sessions. You were always so careful to encrypt your files. But you never thought about physical surveillance. She leaned forward. There are cameras in your house, Mr. Reynolds, tiny ones, hidden in art frames and smoke detectors in the climate control case that held the manuscript. James installed them 18 months ago. We have over 1,000 hours of footage. You discussing thefts, planning strategies, laughing about the founders you destroyed. She paused. Including footage from March 14, 2021, the night before Sarah Lynn died. You and James in your study arguing about Sarah's threat to go to the authorities. You on the phone with someone saying, take care of it, permanently. Robert was shaking his head. I never. We have the phone records, Elena continued relentlessly. The number you called belongs to Marcus Reeves, professional fixer. He's already been arrested. Already talking. Says you paid him $50,000 to tamper with Sarah's car. Harrison held up a hand. I need to confer with my client. Take your time, Elena said. She stood up, walked to the door, stopped. Mr. Reynolds, one more thing. Your challenge tonight. Offering your yearly salary to anyone who could translate the manuscript. Robert looked up. His eyes were dead. What about it? I'm going to hold you to that. Your yearly salary is $850,000. I'm donating it to a fund we're establishing for the founders you defrauded. Consider it the first payment on a very long debt. She opened the door. Oh, and the manuscript, it's being donated to the Smithsonian. They have a new exhibit on indigenous language preservation. Sarah Lynn's name will be on the plaque. She left. Behind her, she could hear Robert starting to cry. The trial took 8 months. Robert Reynolds was charged with 47 counts of fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, and dozens of lesser charges. The evidence was overwhelming. The encrypted files James had copied, the camera's footage, the phone records, the testimony of 50 founders who'd been defrauded. Marcus Reeves, the fixer, had taken a plea deal, testified that Robert had hired him to kill Sarah Lynn, showed them the text messages, the payment receipts, the whole sordid trail. Robert's lawyers tried everything, claimed entrapment, claimed the evidence was illegally obtained, claimed James Whitmore was the real mastermind and Robert was just a pawn. The jury didn't buy any of it. 47 counts, guilty. 1 count, conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. The judge was a woman in her 60s. She'd spent 30 years on the bench. She'd seen everything, but even she looked disgusted as she delivered the sentence. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice cold, "you targeted the most vulnerable people in your industry, people who were already fighting against systemic discrimination, people who trusted you because you shared their Asian heritage. You betrayed that trust. You stole their work. You destroyed their dreams. And when one person threatened to expose you, you had her killed." She paused. "You showed no remorse, no understanding of the harm you caused. In your mind, you were just being smart, taking advantage of opportunities. But what you did was evil, calculated, cruel. I'm sentencing you to 45 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. You will pay restitution of $180 million to your victims. You will forfeit all assets, your house, your cars, your art collection, everything." Robert just stared at the table, didn't react. "Additionally," the judge continued, "you are permanently barred from serving as an officer or director of any public company. You may never work in venture capital or investment management again." She looked at him with something like pity. "You had everything, Mr. Reynolds. Wealth, success, respect. And you threw it all away because you couldn't see other people as human. Because you thought you were smarter than everyone else." She banged her gavel. "Court is adjourned." Elena watched from the gallery as Robert was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look at anyone, didn't make eye contact, just shuffled along like a man going to his execution. James Whitmore sat a few rows ahead of her. He'd testified for 6 days, been cross-examined brutally, but he'd held up. Told the truth even when it made him look terrible. The prosecution had honored their deal, no charges, full immunity. But James looked hollowed out, like the trial had taken something essential from him. Elena approached him as people filed out of the courtroom. "How are you?" she asked. James shrugged. "I don't know if I'll ever be okay, but..." He looked at the empty defendant's table. "At least it's over." "It's not over," Elena said gently. "You're going to carry this for the rest of your life. What you did, what you helped Robert do, Sarah's death." James flinched. "I know. But you made it right, as much as anyone can. You stopped him, saved other people from being hurt. That matters." "Does it?" James's voice was bitter. "I'm free, Robert's in prison, but Sarah's still dead. Our baby is still dead. The 50 people we defrauded still lost years of their lives. Saying sorry doesn't fix that." Elena didn't have an answer, because he was right. Some things couldn't be fixed. Some harm was permanent. "What will you do now?" she asked instead. James was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going back to school. Computer science education. I want to teach kids coding, especially kids from communities like the ones we targeted. Free classes, open source. Everything Robert and I did was about hoarding knowledge, keeping people out. I want to do the opposite." He looked at Elena. "It won't bring Sarah back, won't undo what I did, but maybe I can make sure some kid who would have been the next Robert Reynolds victim gets a fair shot instead." Elena nodded. "That's good, that's..." Her voice caught. "Sarah would like that." James smiled. It was sad and small, but real. "Yeah, she would." He stood up, extended his hand. Elena shook it. "Thank you," James said. "For what? For seeing me as more than just Robert's accomplice, for giving me a chance to make it right." "You did that yourself," Elena said. "I just opened the door. You walked through it." James left. Elena sat alone in the empty courtroom for a while, thinking about justice, about redemption, about whether anything they'd done actually mattered. Her phone buzzed. A text from Miguel. "Is it over?" Elena typed back, "It's over. He got 45 years. The response came immediately, "Good. Come home. Mom made mole." Elena smiled, stood up, walked out of the courthouse into the San Francisco afternoon. The fog was rolling in. The city was beautiful and cold and indifferent. Life continued. Robert Reynolds would spend the rest of his life in prison. James Whitmore would spend his teaching kids to code. 50 founders would get their money back, not all of it, but enough to rebuild. And Elena would go home to her mother's mole and her brother's gratitude, and the knowledge that sometimes, occasionally, the good guys won. 1 year later, Elena stood in front of a classroom. Not a real classroom, a community center in East Oakland. Folding chairs and card tables, a whiteboard she'd bought herself, 20 kids between ages 12 and 16, black, brown, Asian, poor, brilliant. She'd started the coding class 6 months ago, free, no prerequisites, just show up and learn. The response had been overwhelming. She'd had to turn away 50 kids because she didn't have space. Next semester, she was expanding, hiring more teachers, finding a bigger space. Miguel was helping. He'd rebuilt Bridge Code with the restitution money. It was thriving now, connecting developers, offering mentorship, fighting the kind of theft that had almost destroyed him. He'd donated space for Elena's classes, provided computers, helped recruit instructors. "Okay," Elena said, clapping her hands. "Today we're learning about encryption. Who can tell me why encryption matters?" A girl in the front row raised her hand. Her name was Jasmine. 14, lived in a shelter with her mom and 2 siblings. Could code circles around most adults Elena knew. "To protect information," Jasmine said, "so people can't steal your data or your ideas." "Exactly," Elena said, "and in today's world your ideas are your most valuable asset. Your code, your creativity, your innovation. Protecting that isn't just smart, it's survival." She pulled up a slide. "I want to tell you a story about a man named Robert Reynolds who built an empire by stealing other people's ideas, and about the people who stopped him." For the next hour, she told them everything. About the 50 founders who'd been defrauded, about James Whitmore's redemption, about the manuscript written in code, about justice. The kids listened with wide eyes. When she finished, a boy in the back raised his hand. "Ms. Vasquez, how did you learn to read that code?" "The Mayan glyphs," Elena smiled. "I learned because I was curious, because I cared about preserving languages and cultures that powerful people wanted to erase, because I understood that knowledge is power, but only if you use it to help people, not hurt them." She looked around the room, at 20 faces full of potential, 20 futures that could go anywhere. "That's what I want you to understand. You're learning to code. That's a tool, a powerful tool. But tools can build or destroy. You get to choose." Jasmine raised her hand again. "What happened to the manuscript, the one with all the evidence?" "It's in the Smithsonian," Elena said. "In an exhibit about indigenous language preservation and modern cryptography. Sarah Lynn's name is on the plaque. She's the woman who died because she tried to stop Robert Reynolds, the woman who inspired the code that finally brought him down." "Was she a coder?" another student asked. "No," Elena said. "She was just someone who loved languages, who believed that communication could bridge divides, who thought the world could be better." She paused. She was 28 years old when she died, pregnant with her first child. And the man she loved, the man who helped steal from all those people he spent the rest of his life trying to make up for losing her. The room was silent. "That's the real lesson," Elena continued. "It's not about the code or the money or the clever investigation. It's about choices. Every single day you choose who you want to be. Robert Reynolds chose greed. James Whitmore chose redemption. Sarah Lynn chose courage." She looked at each student individually. "What will you choose?" A hand went up. A boy who'd been quiet all session. "Ms. Vasquez, Can we learn the Mayan code, the one you used? Elena smiled. Yes. In fact, that's our project for next semester. We're going to study indigenous coding systems, learn how ancient languages can be adapted for modern cryptography, understand how culture and technology intersect. She pulled out a stack of papers. But first you need to understand the basics. So tonight's homework: research 3 indigenous languages. Learn about their structure, their history, why they matter. Next week you'll present to the class. Groans, but also excitement. These kids were hungry, desperate to learn, to prove themselves, to build something that couldn't be taken away. As the class filed out, Jasmine approached Elena's desk. "Ms. Vasquez, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think—" Jasmine hesitated. "Do you think people like us can really make it in tech with all the Robert Reynolds out there?" Elena thought about her answer carefully. "I think people like Robert Reynolds exist. They'll always exist. People who see others as resources to exploit, people who think power means stepping on everyone else." She leaned forward. "But I also think people like us, people who've had to fight for everything, we're stronger, smarter, more creative, because we've had to be. We don't have the luxury of coasting on privilege." "When I was undercover in Robert's house," Elena continued, "I scrubbed his toilets, I folded his laundry, I let him treat me like I was invisible, and the whole time I was gathering evidence, learning his patterns, preparing to destroy him." She smiled. "He thought I was nothing, and that's what destroyed him, because he couldn't see me as a threat until it was too late." Jasmine's eyes were shining. That's like a superpower." "It is," Elena agreed. "Being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. As long as you know your own worth, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks." Jasmine nodded slowly. "I'm going to remember that." "Good," Elena said. "Now go do your homework." Jasmine left. Elena sat alone in the empty classroom, thought about Robert Reynolds in his prison cell, about James Whitmore rebuilding his life, about Sarah Lynn who'd never get to see the change she'd inspired, about 50 founders who'd gotten their money back but would always carry the scars, about her brother Miguel who'd survived and thrived, about 20 kids in Oakland learning to code, learning to protect themselves, learning to build instead of break. Justice wasn't clean, wasn't simple, wasn't always satisfying, but sometimes, occasionally, it was enough. 2 years after the trial, Elena received an invitation. The Smithsonian was opening their new exhibit, Words as Weapons, Language, Power, and Justice in the Digital Age. The centerpiece was the manuscript, the confession that had brought down Robert Reynolds. The document written in love and loss and determination. Elena flew to Washington, D.C., walked through the marble halls of the museum, found the exhibit tucked away in a corner gallery. It was beautiful. The manuscript was displayed in a climate-controlled case lit from above. The glyphs seemed to glow. Next to it, a plaque. "This document represents the intersection of ancient language and modern justice." Written in contemporary Mayan glyphs by FBI informant James Whitmore. It detailed years of fraud and theft targeting minority founders in the tech industry. The code was broken by Dr. Elena Vasquez, FBI special agent and expert in indigenous languages. The investigation led to the conviction of venture capitalist Robert Reynolds and the recovery of $180 million in stolen intellectual property. This exhibit is dedicated to the memory of Sarah Lynn, 1993 to 2021 linguist and advocate whose love of language inspired the code that brought her killer to justice. Elena stood in front of the case for a long time. Other visitors moved around her reading plaques, taking photos. A voice beside her said, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Elena turned. James Whitmore stood there. He looked different, older, calmer. There was gray in his hair that hadn't been there 2 years ago. "James," Elena said, "I didn't know you'd be here." "They invited me to speak," James said, "about the creation of the manuscript, about using code for justice instead of theft." He looked at the display. "I almost didn't come. Felt too much like celebrating." It's not celebration, Elena said. It's commemoration. There's a difference. They stood in silence for a moment. Then James said, I'm getting married. Elena looked at him in surprise. That's congratulations. Who? Her name is Maria. She was one of the founders Robert defrauded, lost everything. We met at one of the victim advocacy meetings, started talking, found out we had... He paused. We had both lost everything to the same man. We understood each other. Does she know, Elena asked quietly, about your part in it? She knows everything, James said. I told her on our second date. Figured if she was going to run, better to happen early. He smiled slightly. She didn't run. Said everyone deserves a chance to make things right. Said Sarah would have wanted me to be happy. She's right, Elena said. Sarah would have. I visit her grave every week, James said. Talk to her. Tell her about the kids I'm teaching, the lives we're changing, the way her death, her sacrifice created something good. His voice broke. I tell her I'm sorry, that I should have protected her, that I should have stopped Robert sooner. And what does she say? Elena asked gently. James laughed. It was wet emotional. Nothing. She's dead. But, he touched the glass of the display case. But I like to think she'd be proud that this, he gestured at the manuscript, that this is her legacy, not the way she died, but what came after. Elena nodded. They stood together looking at the glyphs neither of them could read without effort. Words that had brought down an empire, words that had changed 50 lives, words that had created something new from something ancient. I should go, James said. Maria's waiting. We're having dinner with her family. Be happy, Elena said. You've earned it. Have I? James's voice was uncertain. After everything I did? Yes, Elena said firmly. You can't change the past, but you can build a better future. That's what you're doing. It's enough. James nodded, started to walk away, stopped, turned back. Dr. Vasquez, thank you for everything. You did the hard part, Elena said. I just opened the door. No, James said. You saw me when I was invisible, when I'd made myself invisible. You saw me and gave me a chance to be better. He smiled. That's everything. He left. Elena stood alone in the gallery, thought about visibility, about being seen, about choosing who you wanted to be. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jasmine, her star student, Ms. V. I got accepted to MIT full scholarship, computer science and linguistics. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Typed back, proud of you. You're going to change the world. The response came immediately. I'm going to try, just like you taught us. Elena put her phone away, looked at the manuscript one more time, at Sarah Lynn's name on the plaque, at the words that had brought justice. Words mattered, language mattered, being seen mattered, and sometimes, occasionally, the good guys won. She walked out of the museum into the D.C. evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. She thought about Robert Reynolds in his prison cell, about the 50 founders rebuilding their lives, about James Whitmore teaching kids to code, about Jasmine heading to MIT, about her brother Miguel's thriving company, about 20 kids in Oakland learning that they mattered. Justice wasn't always clean, wasn't always simple, wasn't always satisfying, but it was worth fighting for. Every single time. Elena pulled out her phone, called Miguel. Hey, she said when he answered. Want to get dinner? I have a story to tell you.